Hi, I recently came across the CSS image reveal, and first off I want to show you how this works. So let's look at the compiled HTML. Let's maximize this. Okay, that was a bad call on my part, and this looks pretty confusing. It's because CodePen presents it in a weird way, but DevTools should... Okay, yeah, much better. Okay, so as you can see, we have the exact same image twice here, but the only one we see is the one at the bottom, which is grayscaled. As you can see, if I disable that filter, it's not grayscaled anymore. The one on top we cannot see at all at first, and that's because it's clipped to nothing in various ways. But then when we hover its parent, it gets a different clip path that allows us to see it fully. And here we see it transitioning in between the two states, which are created with clip start and clip end, these two custom properties here. Okay, so you can see it transitioning in between and covering the grayscaled version underneath it. Now, the problem with this approach is that it uses the exact same image twice for each and every one of these styles. And what I'll be showing you today is my first idea on how to do this without image duplication. Now, when I look at this, what I see is something kind of like a radial gradient, and here something kind of like a linear gradient. Radial, okay, linear, radial, linear. Okay, so that's what we'll be doing. We're going to have the image, and we're also going to have a gradient layer. So let's get here. We already have those images, so let's add some gradient info. Okay, so gradient. This gradient is going to have a type. Okay, so 0 is going to be linear and type 1 is going to be radial. So type, let's say 1 because the first one is radial. There's a bit of a lag there, but whatever. Now, the radial ones are also going to depend on the position of the center, and the linear ones are going to depend on the angle. So that origin position, so let's say it's going to be 0, 0. Yeah, there's sorry, old laptop, Linux. Yeah, not always as fast as I'd like, so sometimes it can get pretty laggy. Oh, come on, maximize. Okay, now for every second one I'm going to, oh, not like that. So for every second one I'm going to make it linear, right? So this one is going to get type 0, so it's going to be linear. And it's also going to have an angle there. So this is obviously going to be degrees. And now let's start modifying for each and every individual one. Actually, no, let's just get the length and put something on the screen first, and then we're going to get to modifying each and every one. So, okay, so here we're going to have for let I going from 0 all the way up to n. Increment this at every step. We're going to have these tile elements, and in a style attribute we're going to be setting a URL, and this is going to use, so let's get the current item. So at index I, okay, so here we're going to need to interpolate it. Right, so now let's set on tile element, we're going to set padding, okay, let's say something like 6.5 ems, and we're going to set a background. We're going to set it to that URL, okay, and let's make it 50%, so in the middle, and cover, okay, so it's going to look something like this. And of course on the body we're going to want to have display grid. We're going to set a grid template columns. This is going to be repeat max content. Okay, let's also set a spacing value for the grid gap. Let's say something like 0.5 ems. So here we're going to have a grid gap, that spacing value. Let's also set place content center. Okay, this is starting to look like something. Now if we're going to here, let's set here, let's get gradient, and here no, okay, and here we're also going to get a value, and this one is going to be depending on the type. So if the type is 1, it's going to be that origin value, and otherwise it's going to be the angle value. Okay, so we're going to set that here. So the value is going to be set to gradient of it. Okay, so having done this, here we're going to have, so if the type is 0, we're going to have a gradient that's going to be set as a linear gradient using that angle, and it's going to use a list of stops, which we're going to define here, and it's basically just a dummy list for now, but just so that we have it gray. So we're going to see in a moment what kind of gray, but for now let's just leave it like that. And if you remember one of my previous videos, this partial grayscale effect, we got it by having this linear gradient, this gradient from transparent to gray, okay, and a background blend mode of luminosity. Okay, so that's pretty much what we'll be doing here as well. So we're going to have that URL, then we're going to have that gradient, and we're going to set background blend mode luminosity. Okay, so it's going to become more obvious if we set something like 50% and 0. It looks like more of a split, but it's not that obvious. Okay, and the reason that it's not that obvious is here we don't just have grayscale, we also have a brightness. Okay, so we have brightness 40%. Now if you've seen my tiny CSS tips on Twitter, so you can emulate something like filter brightness of a value that's between 0 and 100%. If you have a layer with a gray with a lightness value equal to that same percentage, and you use a blend mode, that's multiply. So let's get back here. So here we use multiply. You can see that it gets darkened, but now it doesn't get grayscaled anymore. So we need 2 such gradient layers. So one that grayscales it at the bottom, and another one on top that darkens it. So this one is going to be luminosity. And now we have to set that gray to HSL 0%, saturation 0 because it's a gray, and of course we want that 40%. Okay, so now you can see it looks a lot better. Now for the second type 1, this one is going to be radial, and at that origin. Okay, so now you can see it better there. So now let's move on to changing these values individually. So this one is going to be 100%, 100% 0. Okay, let's make this minus 90 degrees. Let's make this 50%, 50%. let's make this 90 degrees. Okay, let's make this other one is going to be 0, 100%, right? And let's make this one right here 100%, 100%, and let's make this 180 degrees. Okay, so now what we can do is not use 50% there, but use a calc. So let's say this is going to be a hover value times 100%. And we're going to register this. So we're going to have property hover. And here we're going to have syntax number, and initial value, and inherits. We can set this to false for better performance. Okay, so now having done this, we're going to switch this on hover. We're going to switch it to 1, and we're also going to transition it. So transition, something like this. What did I mess up? Okay. I'm just not seeing. Oh, yeah, I didn't set it to 1. That's the problem. So now you can see that I'm just getting this effect there. Okay. So yeah, like that. Super simple, no magic numbers, except for this one. So let's fix that. Okay, so here we're going to put everything within the body, and let's indent that properly. And here in a style attribute, we'll be setting a custom property, and this is basically going to be the square root of n rounded up. So that's going to be ceiling of the square root of n. Okay, so now we're going to use that here, and it's basically going to also give us 3. But one other thing, we want this to scale with the viewport. So we're going to have something like minimum, and of course, since padding is just half of it, so this padding goes from right in the middle up to here, and another 6.5 ems from the middle to here. So in total it's going to be twice of that. Okay, so this is going to be calc, so we need to divide by 2 or multiply by 0.5, and here we're going to have 100 minus, and here we're going to have m plus 1, because we have the gaps in between, which are m minus 1, and we want the spacing on the sides. Okay, and everything, this is going to be multiplied with that spacing s, and we want it all to be divided by m. So this should now scale nicely, and it does, as you can see. Okay, now having done this, one more thing I want to do here is set margin 0, min height something like this. Okay, and something else that I want to point out, when this is really small, we don't have a space at the top. Okay, so we're going to need to introduce a padding, which is going to be equal to that spacing. But the problem with that is that it still creates a scroll bar, because it adds to this min height. Okay, so we need to set box sizing border box. so that it gets subtracted from it. Okay, so now you don't have the scroll bar if we don't really need it, and it scales nicely, and we get that result. So yeah, and the compiled CSS, as you can see, there's no redundancy in it, there's no repetition or stuff, except, you know, for that gradient custom property before and after, so that's pretty much the only repetition thing. And here the compiled HTML is much smaller as well. I do have some issues with this. The first being that it uses Houdini, so it's only going to work in Chromium browsers. And then there's also the fact that these are not really image elements, so you can't really right-click them to download them or to open them in a new tab. But I will be showing you a way to get that sort of result using an image in a future video. So stay tuned for that, and I do hope you've enjoyed this. And if you have, if you like the work that I'm putting out since early 2012, please consider supporting it. You can do so by being a cool cat and becoming a patron on Patreon. The link is going to be in the description, as well as links to all of the things mentioned in this video. Or you can get me something off my Amazon wishlist. Again, the links are going to be in the description. Or you can at least share this to show the role what can be done with CSS these days, with very little CSS. In any event, thanks for watching, and until next time, bye!